All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the third session of the Cancer Workshop. Today's session is on firefighting gear and working with industry and standards. And today we have a group of panelists here that are going to present their information as well to us. So thank you, everybody that has joined us. Truly appreciate it. And truly, truly appreciate your input on this very important topic for us in our industry. First off, I'd like to ask Tina, our Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, to please provide us with our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chief Jones, and welcome everyone. The National Office of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin people. We recognize them as the traditional keepers of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We recognize the hurts and harms of the past and the strength and resilience of the people, and believe that working together we can make for a better future. And we're all very glad that you're all here from your own parts of the country here today. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tina. Greatly appreciate it. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting in my past in the fire service, I'd like to introduce myself as Greg Jones. I'm the Director of Fire Services for the Amherst Fire Department in Amherst, Nova Scotia. I'm also a Director at Large on the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. And thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists this morning. And what I'm going to ask the panelists to do when we go to our first question, just before you answer the question, I would please ask you to introduce yourselves so that everybody's well aware of who you are and where you reside from. And thank you for your input on this very important topic today. So first off, I'd like to turn to our panelists and ask the question around firefighting gear and working with our industry and standards. Kind of tell us what standards are out there and what it truly does look like. And we'll start out first with Heather Simpson today. And Heather, welcome.
Thank you very much, Greg. And this is an interesting one because I'm going to be speaking about something that's very different for most people that are in structural. So my name is Heather Simpson and I work for the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. We've been around for a little bit over 40 years. So within Wildland Fire, we're CIFFC, and I'm the fire science manager while transitioning at the moment. And in terms of my background, I did 10 years of firefighting in BC with the BC wildfire, and then I actually moved to Australia, was out of firefighting, and then ended up doing my PhD in Australia, looking at forest firefighting on large fires, and have since come back in as the fire science manager at CIFFC back in Canada. So from the wildland fire perspective, you know, the gear is very different. We are out there in Nomex clothing, like Nomex is just a brand name, so it's just fire resistant clothing. You know, you might see just a simple hard hat. People could be in anything from gum boots to hiking boots to steel-toed boots. And that's if you're employed, say, with the fire agencies across Canada, which are typically the provincial and territorial governments. But you could also be out firefighting on a contract crew or with wildland fire. Also the volunteer firefighters across Canada, you know, the structural firefighters and rural structural fire departments might be involved in wildland firefighting or forest firefighting. And yeah, the gear is not turnout gear. So could just be in simple, non-flammable jeans and a t-shirt. And maybe a hard hat. And that's a big difference, I think, comparatively in terms of protection, but it also is in terms of what we could wear, because I think that anybody here that thinks that you could go out and do wildland firefighting for, you know, 12 hours in a day or something like that, wearing turnout gear and breathing apparatus, would quickly find that we would be having more problems with firefighter fatigue and exhaustion rather than being able to protect our employees. So just a reminder of how different the gear could be.
Right on. Well, thank you very much, Heather, for making that the point between the two different types of gear. One thing we commonly think of as gear in firefighting, we always think of structural firefighting gear. And as you just pointed out, there's numerous different types of gear that we use in our industry to do the jobs we do. And thank you very much for pointing out the fact and the differences in the wildfire environment. Appreciate that. All right, so we'll go next to Richard. Richard, please introduce yourself and please talk a little bit about it as well.
Sure. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to be here. My name is Richard Kesler, research engineer with the Fire Safety Research Institute, which is one of UL research institutes. I've been there for just over a year now. And then prior to that, spent over 10 years with the Illinois Fire Service Institute at the University of Illinois. And in my time, really at both institutions, I've focused on the effects of firefighting gear on the firefighter, weighing trade-offs between chemical exposure, heat stress, cardiovascular risks, and then the impact on the biomechanics of the firefighter. Everything from the turnout gear to the air pack, different size and weights of SCBA, firefighting hoods with the introduction of particulate blocking hoods, how those have impacted firefighting gear. And really, I guess to answer the question of what standards are out there, most of what I've done is focused on the NFPA standards, obviously being based out of the US, focused very heavily on NFPA 1971, the standard on protective ensembles for structural firefighting, proximity firefighting, and then NFPA 1851, the standard on selection, care, and maintenance of protective ensembles for structural firefighting and proximity firefighting. So, you know, both those, and I'm sure we'll jump into it as we go, there's some consolidation efforts that are going on at NFPA. So those numbers will be rolled into a collective standard in the near future. But that's what my work has primarily focused on, is addressing gear that meets those standards and how changes in the performance of the gear and to increase protection may have trade-offs in terms of heat stress or ability to do the job with full range of motion. So.
All right, thank you very much for that, Richard, and welcome to the panel today.
Thanks
Just want to remind everybody that's on this session today, excuse me, if you would like to participate in providing us with some questions, please go into the chat, and you will see in the chat function today, there's information there on how to participate in Menti to provide your questions. So please go to the chat and ensure that you use the code for Menti, and that will give us the opportunity to also see your questions in the background. Thank you for that. Jeffrey, please take an opportunity to introduce yourself as well, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Stull. I'm with a company called International Personal Protection, which provides research, testing, and consulting services. Originally, it was with the U.S. Coast Guard, and at the time worked in their personal protective equipment program. I then went to a research institute, but since then, since 1993, I've had this work and effort in the whole area of protective clothing and equipment, not just emergency responders such as firefighters, but healthcare, industrial, and so on. So it has given me a unique perspective, but I can tell you that from the standards perspective, at least, I've been involved with the NFPA standards for as long as practically anyone that's still around, on 40 years going on now of working with the NFPA, ASTM. I've kept aware of things like CGSB has had its 155 standard, B&Q has its standard. Obviously, in North America, we see a predominant usage of NFPA standards. We have many Canadian members on our committees. NFPA is making it harder on us. We've got these consolidation, as Richard just pointed out. But this is all good, working towards a common goal of promoting health and safety of firefighters. I will also tell you that in some of my experience, I've had the pleasure of working with a variety of different groups. One notable study that we led was the study related to heat stress. We call it the Indianapolis Field Study, that was done in conjunction with the IFF, that led to the use of breathable clothing. We've also done a lot of work in the protection from hazardous chemicals. Actually, we've got its start mainly with weapons of mass destruction concerns following 9/11. But that type of technology has actually promoted some additional protection to firefighters. So there's a lot that's going on. And I'm looking forward to answering the questions and hearing from the other panelists and group that's present today. Thank you.
Well, very much. Thank you very much, Jeff, for your input today. It's greatly appreciated that you're here, and we will have lots of questions for you for sure. So thank you. Robert.
Good morning,
take an
Chief
opportunity-
Jones.
Perfect. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you. Thank you for having me as a panelist. My name is Robert Hosselet. I work for Starfield Line, and we are a PP manufacturer based in Toronto. So a lot to cover here as far as standards. I'm going to try and be as kind of quick as I can. I'm going to come back to some stuff that Heather mentioned too, just to add to what she says, because I think it's also relevant these days as we're seeing some changes in the marketplace. So when we talk about the NFPA standards that we follow with respect to firefighters, not just structural firefighting, but wildland or urban interface firefighting, also bloodborne pathogens when firefighters do medical calls. We talk about the following standards typically. 1975, which involves stationware. 1999, which is bloodborne pathogen. That's more of an EMS thing, but you get some transition for firefighters who do a lot of medical calls, and that's becoming a growing requirement we're finding. 1983, which is rope rescue. 1951, which is another growing standard, which has to do with technical rescue. That could apply to trench rescue, car extrication, high angle rescue, and so on. NFPA 1994 and 1992, which are kind of tied together, that deal with, you could say, CBRN or hazmat. Again, there's a lot of crossover with fire departments that have hazmat teams that work within those standards. 1971, which of course is PPE from head to toe, which is obviously our kind of our biggest focus. As Richard mentioned, in 2024, there's going to be a change. There's a lot of standards being amalgamated. In the case of what firefighters are wearing from head to toe, that includes boots, helmets, gloves, the bunker gear, also SCBA. It's coming into a new standard called 1970, which covers 1975, 1971. And Richard, you could correct me if I'm wrong. It's 1982, 1983, which are two SCBA standards. So basically for structural firefighting, whatever a firefighter is wearing is going to go under the auspices of that new standard. So further to Heather's points about wildland firefighting, there's been a big uptake in that for a number of reasons that are related to that. Also some other reasons we've noticed in the marketplace in the last year, and there's a bit more of a tie-in between those two standards, 1977 and 1951, the technical rescue, and in some cases 1999 bloodborne pathogen. There's also currently still CGSB standards 155-22. I always get that one mixed up. That deals with wildland firefighting as it pertains to Canada. There are a couple of manufacturers who build in Canada to that standard, and primarily for a lot of the provincial firefighting teams. We tend not to, just because a lot of our stuff is requirements we get for requests for wildland gear is NFPA 1977. So we have representatives from our parent company in the US at Lion who sit on, I think, almost all of those standards committees that I just mentioned. So you know, I've got a direct pipeline to what's going on and a lot of the changes coming up, and there are a number of changes again under the auspices of 1970. So I think I covered everything I wanted to say about the standards. So thank you.
No, greatly appreciate that by all means, and thank you folks for your input on the standards. As we know, there are a number of standards that affect not just only firefighting equipment, but everything that we use in the jobs that we do each and every day. So with that being said, you know, I have another question I have is, all the equipment that we do use, you know, how do we make sure that we properly clean it and use it in such a manner that's effective for proper use? So Richard, I'll go to you with this question first.
Sure. So, I mean, the standards right now recommend 2 advanced cleanings per year, and that recently changed from the previous edition, which suggested only 1 advanced cleaning per year. You know, recognizing the hazards, the carcinogenic chemical exposure risks, right? I think most are aware of those now. Increase the need for those advanced cleanings. As far as how to clean the gear, we actually ran a study at the Illinois Fire Service Institute during my time there, partnering with NIOSH and with the Fire Safety Research Institute to try to answer kind of that question of what are the best means to wash the gear, and what are the drawbacks to some of those mechanisms. So we took 24 sets of gear and ran them through an exposure simulator 10, 20, and all the way up to 40 times, pulling gear out at each of those intervals and running the NFPA tests again to see how that gear continued to perform. If we can share that paper, I'd be happy to send that if that can somehow be sent to the group. But we found some really interesting results. And that was that, laundering the gear does have an impact on some of the strength of the material, just with the amount of hardware, and the physical abuse of laundering the gear. But some of the other ways of cleaning gear, such as cleaning the surface, as we would do it for like a field decon or preliminary exposure reduction, certainly reduces the contamination on the exterior of the gear, but may not clean the inside as well, right? If we're not cleaning that, so there's trade-offs to either way. We also looked at simply doing nothing, and found that not surprisingly, the gear became extremely contaminated. In fact, so much so that after only 3 or 4 exposures, the turnout coat was able to stand on its own. It had developed enough contamination that fabric was stiff enough that it could stand on its own. So without going through, we could spend the whole time, give a 4-hour class on the results of that study fairly easily. But some of that data does exist, and is published. And really the best right now that we've seen is laundering the gear, but recognizing that, with repeated launderings are going to be trade-offs in the performance of the fabric. It's still held up well, still would, be serviceable after, a number of washes, 20 washes with the 10-year service life twice a year. And we would not expect that to be an issue. But once you start to reach that 40 or more washes, that could be a legitimate concern.
Okay, very valid points, Richard. So thank you very much for that. Heather, when you think of wildland firefighters, how would this look in that realm as well, around cleaning of their gear and equipment?
So for wildland firefighters, this even varies across provinces and territories. And it basically comes down to whether you even have access to clean your clothing while you're actually deployed to a fire. So often wildland firefighters might be deployed for up to 2 weeks at a time, or even 3 weeks at a time. And if you're in a line camp or a spike camp, then you're actually camping in the bush for that whole time. And you might have, like 2 issues of Nomex gear, Nomex clothing or something like that. And you have to think that you're in the bush, there's not even a shower. Like there's not cleaning facilities for yourself, let alone for your clothing. And then additionally, there's other things. So you're getting exposure of all the smoke, but there's also like the petrochemical exposure. So let's say that somebody spills diesel or gasoline or bar oil or something like that on them. They're going to be out in the bush without the ability to even wash that off their body or their clothing. And then if you're not out in the bush and you do have a camp, like there's a lot of camps that do have laundry facilities, but we might be deployed out and you end up in a hotel, or you never know. I have been overnight in schools, arenas, out in the bush. I've been in hotels, and whether you have access to laundry facilities or you're taking that contaminated gear home and you're washing it in your own laundry, or should you be going to a laundromat and contaminating, like bringing that and putting it into the public, right? Like there's not necessarily like a simple solution within fire to meet the needs of the wildland firefighters across Canada, because it really varies on what we're doing. and how remote we are. And also if we're in the wildland urban interface, what are we being exposed to with the smoke when that is occurring as well. So we do attend things like we're not meant to be fighting car fires and structure fires, but when you're out there, that smoke is all in the same environment, and it's not like we can avoid it.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for that. Very valid point when you think of being in the open element and the washing and the ability to be able to do that as well. That's extremely important to point it out, and thank you. Robert, how about you?
This is a very important topic, and one that I get a tremendous amount of questions on, and will probably continue to do so. So the recommendation that I have is that people follow NFP 1851, which is the standard for care, selection, and maintenance of structural firefighting gear. You could say everything that you need to set yourself up to a certain degree is captured within that standard. There's a lot of very good recommendations in there. And I see sometimes, and this applies not only to small departments, but even big departments, where they kind of go outside 1851 and they're asking questions about this particular piece of equipment or cleaning products and so on. And I try and rein them back in. The recommendation that I usually give is to have that standard available within the fire agency, and perhaps one or two people focused on that particular standard to ensure that the right equipment is being used, the right cleaning products are being used, the right processes are being used, because sometimes it's all over the map. There's many departments that do an outstanding job. There's some fire halls that I've seen that have popped up, particularly in Alberta. There's one in southern Quebec too that I have not seen yet, that they address this whole topic very, very well. And they have set up a path for firefighters to follow as they come back from a scene that they have to follow through the structure that has to do with donning and doffing and so on and so on. And I'd be happy to share those departments' names with each of the members. But they kind of address this because there's a serious back end to this, and the ramifications, as Richard mentioned, about the long-term buildup of contaminants and suits, if they're not addressed correctly, will have real health implications. It's not going to happen today, but it'll happen over 10, 20 years is my understanding. So follow 1851, engage with some people within your staff that can understand it and utilize it correctly. Engage with equipment vendors who can supply front-loading extractors, who can supply preferably air dryers or even hang drying, who can supply chemical pumps, and who can supply the right chemicals. Engage with an ISP that's in your area. And an ISP is an independent service provider who typically are certified to NFP 1851, who do all we'll do some of your cleaning, but usually typically your inspections and your repairs. Understand what products they're using. Probably the weakest area, and I see this over and over again, and I have to go back to the same departments, is the types of chemicals that people are using. There's a handful of them out there that are geared towards bunker gear. And then I see people using multi-stage products that are geared towards industrial wash that will degrade the gear very quickly. Kevlar Nomex are very strong, but they do not like chlorine bleach. They do not like UV rays, and they do not like harsh chemicals. And it's a constant battle for me to do a lot of education about that. So that's where the part of talking to ISPs, find out what products they're using that are safe for bunker gear. That's really a good step. And again, I'm going to throw some large departments into that mix, as well as some small ones where those challenges occur. So, trying to eliminate, reduce, completely pull out as much contaminants as possible seems to be a growing priority for good health reasons, right? So, and then the preliminary exposure reduction after the scene is also a key factor. And that, again, that's all outlined within 1851. The structure is there for you to follow, and we highly encourage people to do that because we want you to get the best life out of your gear. We want it to be working and proper for as up to that 10-year cycle. Richard had a very good point, though, that for any clothing, whether it's bunker gear or the things that we're all wearing today, washing is very hard on it. So as people are washing their bunker gear and gloves and so on more and more, understanding how to do it properly so that increased washing doesn't decrease the longevity of that gear becomes more important. And that talks about drum speeds of extractors. It talks about temperatures, drying, and so on and so on. So a lot to cram into 5 minutes there, but I do encourage you to get in touch with someone like myself or my counterpart, our competitor here in Canada, or other manufacturers in the States. Ask the questions that you need to get yourself set up properly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Robert. The good point of answering the questions, the amount of time really doesn't matter. The value of the answers you folks are providing us today, it's really important to our industry to help us as well as making sure we can get some stuff documented. So Jeff, I'll go to you next and get your input as well on this.
Well, thank you. So again, 1851, as the speakers have already pointed out, is a key part for structural firefighting. It's interesting that, I did some work back in 1995 that showed how effective clothing was when I was part of Texas Research Institute. And it took 20 years for that to come into fruition. Groups like Fiero in the United States helped promote the NFP 1851. And the key point, again, this has been brought up amply through some of the prior speakers and panelists' input, but the standard tells departments what to do. But what's more important in that standard is we spent extensive time creating annex language. Now, some work that I'm doing now and have been doing for the last 8 years with the Fire Protection Research Foundation on a project called How Clean is Clean, with partners that include the NIOSH and other organizations been brought in to support this work. What we've been trying to do is develop best practices. So you know that you can put a set of clothing into a washer extractor, you can follow instructions. There's plenty of resources out there to do that. Some departments are more strained than others, but anything has to be manually cleaned, whether it's gloves or footwear or helmets. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. And we're focusing a lot of attention on that as we revise the new standard. The foundation itself, the Research Foundation, is promoting best practices. We've got publications, we've got website information, but all the resources have been mentioned, the standard, the other departments, independent service providers are an excellent resource, particularly those that have been verified. And that's the other thing that we've done more of late, I think, that's really trying to help the fire service. We put in a program of cleaning verification, meaning that we're verifying that the cleaning process that's used by those organizations works. The idea is that we verify, and by the way, there's about 80 organizations now that have been verified to NFPA 1851 through UL or safety for Intertech, two organizations that are certifications, product manufacturers as well. Those groups have been verified, but we hope this information is translating back into the fire service. Many ISPs have training programs, they have other information, as do some of the manufacturers. And there's a lot of resources going into this. So I think the information is going up. We're seeing increases in cleaning capabilities, but I want to forewarn you that some of the disappointing news that we have is we set our bar at 50% cleaning for most organic and inorganic contamination removal rates, which hasn't changed too much since what I saw in 1995. That's getting better because we have metrics by which we can judge things. And in the new standard, we're also going to be verifying products, detergents, cleaning agents, and obviously that goes hand in hand with the detailed information and guidance for how to make decisions about what to do, whether it's a specialized cleaning situation or just the regular cleaning. And we're hoping all this information goes into the wildland standard, where there'll be a new 1857 standard that combine wildland and tech rescue cleaning. And that's a path going forward. So a lot of activity. Can't point out enough how important 1851 is, as with the other speakers saying that. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. And with the background and your information and knowledge you've had over the years, on this subject, one thing I will also ask you, and I'll pose this next question to you, is what are the implications of us using old gear?
Well, when you say old gear, we're right now, if you do follow 1851, there's a 10-year mandatory retirement on clothing, which has been controversial, because some departments don't use that gear that often. But we put that in there for several reasons. We put that in there because we think that when gear gets too old, it also gets out of date, not from its utility as much. It's not keeping up with the technology. So we've been adding requirements. We've been making it more safety oriented. We've added qualities that improve the health and well-being of firefighters. So if you get too far out of field with that, then having old gear is not a good thing. The other thing that, of course, I just mentioned is that we know that there is breakdown of gear over time. We know that repeated washing, and especially now where there is a greater awareness within the fire service for the increased frequency, not just the 2 launderings per year that are prescribed for advanced cleaning, but actually washing gear after each and every fire. That is causing breakdown of the gear. I mean, that's the lint that you see in the dryer, right? That's your gear falling apart. And as good as this gear is, it does break down, and some properties break down sooner than others. Insulation gets better, breathability gets worse. Certain parts of the product will break down sooner than others just because of their vulnerability. So that's another reason. But the point of gear also accumulating contamination over time. If we're getting 50% out, and then we wear it again and it gets more contamination, we only get 50% out. You can see how that accumulation can occur over time. And some processes are really good at getting out that contamination, but there's that hazard as well. So, there's just a lot of reasons why gear should be transformed. And this is not a manufacturing scheme. This is not all. This is for health and safety of firefighters, to keep you in the best protection and safest level of clothing performance that you can obtain from this kind of product. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Jeff. Appreciate that. Heather, when we think of the wildfire, the wildfire firefighters, how does it apply the implications of using old gear there?
I think when you're talking about using old gear with firefighting, probably just the wear and tear is going to take it out. So, people are outside working in the bush, in the sun, UV and UV and just general wear and tear. Things get ripped, things get torn, and we're getting new Nomex and stuff all the time. But one of the things is that there's actually I don't know, there's this, you see it around in firehouses as well, where people like to hold on to things. So we have challenges with people wanting to hold on to their hard hats because they get hover exit stickers on them. And you sit there and you look at a hard hat that's got 12 hover exit stickers on it. Well, that's a hard hat that's been out in, a full season of UV for 12 years. And how protective is that at that point? So there's a couple of things where there might be a run of Nomex clothing where, the dye didn't take as well or something like that. And then that becomes this odd badge of honor where if you have, this faded shirt, then it means that you've been around for longer. So it's those things to kind of try and address within the culture as well, that people need to realize that there's trade-offs between protection and those kind of badges of honor of experience and stuff like that. And I'm reminded so much of it every time I'm looking at behind Richard and I see the 2 fire hats on the, on the wall there. It's within this, we culturally have this where we like to hold on to these things because of familiarity and stuff like that. But within wildland firefighting, usually the wear and tear is taking it out. So.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Heather. And, I really appreciate the perspective on the wildfire side. Because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't really think of all the different types of gear we use. And that's one thing to really hone in on, not just only for wildland firefighters as well, but when you think of our firefighters in general, we love putting stickers on things as well and love having our taglines as well and things, but we always have to think of what the implications of that truly is. Richard, I'll go to you next on the same question. What's your input on this?
Sure. Well, I think, Jeff hit it right on, right? Changing technology, improvements in the gear, there's breakdown. We know that whether it's, worn a couple times a year or, multiple times a day, there's going to be breakdown of the gear. So, I think I think we've hit that one pretty good, Jeff. Been in the field. He got that one. But I do want to talk to Heather's point about some of the gear, and the kind of emotional connection to it. 10 years ago, the kind of the emotional piece was the dirty gear, right? And the smell of being in the fire and the environment. And that's really shifted. So, those changes, I think, are occurring, and that cultural change of where, now nobody in a station that I've been to in the last 5 years has dirty gear. It's all clean. And I think that kind of movement has been driven by data and people's experiences. And, hopefully we can make a similar movement with, retiring gear when it reaches its retirement age, even if there is that emotional connection to it, right? It's been with you through this and through that call and through your wildland seasons, but maybe there's a good place for it, tucked away while that new one goes into service. So yeah, I'll end with that.
No, thank you for that. Great. I really appreciate that. Robert, your input on this question.
Very good points by Richard and Jeffrey and Heather. Heather had some interesting ones there about that emotional attachment. So, again, recommendation is to follow 1851. We find that with that 10-year retirement, most career departments, and this is all call driven, or the volume of calls is driving the life expectancy of the gear, but most career fire departments will retire gear after between 5 and 8 years. And again, it all depends on the volume of calls and even individual firefighters. I'm going to throw a couple of things into the mixture that are going to maybe raise some questions. But so with the drive to remove the particulates on a more regular basis, i.e. after every fire scene, which we recommend and think that's a good thing to do, you're going to increase the tempo of the number of washes over that, whether it's a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year period. And yes, and to support Jeffrey, you're going to see some additional wear and tear on the gear. This question was posed to me a few years ago by a department, was that saying, are there any studies that show what happens when gear's been washed, I don't know, 125 times over its life cycle? And you'd say that's an awful lot, but not necessarily, because if you've got a busy hall that's responding to X number of fire calls in a given month, that's not out of the question that they're going to be washing their gear that much. So we haven't conducted a test, and Richard and Jeffrey, maybe you've got some more to bring to the table in that respect, but we would be willing to do that with a department, but it's going to take a couple of years to do that. And the question becomes, why do I say that? Well, if you're going to wash the gear that many times to see how long it's going to last, you got to do it the right way, which is wash it, let it dry for a couple of days, wash it again. You don't want to prematurely throw it into a dryer to speed that whole process up. So this would be kind of a realistic thing. The other thing that we're seeing is the change, and this is kind of recent, the change in the durable water repellent finishes that are being applied to the outer shells in particular have caused a bit of a trade-off in performance. And we're getting some feedback that the outer shells seem to be degrading at a slightly quicker tempo than they would have in the past with the prior durable water repellent finishes that use a different chemical structure. So this is kind of anecdotal. This is not something that we are saying, yes, this is happening. Just something that's coming to our attention recently. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. We'll have to get some more feedback over time, but these are a couple of things that we see happening in the marketplace. It's just that increased tempo of washing, changes in durable water repellent finishes may have some impact on the longevity of the outer shells in particular.
All right, thank you for that, Robert. So next question I have, and Richard, I'm going to bring this one to you to start this one out. When we're thinking of firefighting equipment today, what are some things that we should be concerned about? What should firefighters be aware of? That you've spoke on a few of them earlier on, but just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big thing is recognizing that everything is going to have trade-offs. And if we decide that we could design gear that has the best thermal protection imaginable, right? But there's going to be trade-offs in terms of heat stress. and I think that's the big thing is for every change that we consider making, consider, what are the implications? To Robert's point about the durable water repellents, and Jeff, maybe you could speak to this with the paper you just recently published on some of the water repellent and the performance characteristics of the outer shells. But what are the trade-offs if we reduce the durability of those and maybe change the chemical composition of the outer shell? What are we potentially increasing our exposure to in terms of chemical contaminants? Another study that we did with the firefighting hood was examining adding that particulate blocking layer into the hood. Had some minor changes in hearing and noise reduction. So, how if we're wearing one of these particulate blocking hoods, what we found, at least in a quiet laboratory setting, was that there was some noticeable reduction in the firefighter's performance on your standard hearing test. Now, we still need to examine what that means out on the fire ground, where there's significantly louder and more noise and what that is. But I guess my overall point would be, for every change in a performance of one characteristic, there are some implications, hopefully insignificant, but there are potential changes in other performance characteristics of the gear, and those should always be considered.
All right, thanks for that, Richard. Heather, I'll come to you on that same question.
Yeah, I think that was a really good thing about the trade-offs, because that's what we're really facing these days within wildland firefighting. So in terms of particulate protection, we could go to something that helps stop particulates coming through, but that's going to have a heat exhaustion trade-off. That like thicker gear is going to cause problems with heat and fatigue. One of the things that we're really looking at right now is, airway protection, right? So do we start wearing masks and stuff like that? Well, we can't go and carry around air tanks all day. Like, it's just not possible. So do we wear, like PM 2.5 masks, and what value is there in that? And then there's the trade-off of people feeling stressed when they're breathing or something like that. Like, we do know that you can, I think it was the Canadian women's hockey team that played in masks or something like that. They played a full hockey game in the masks. So that was a really interesting thing to see. But so we know that you can wear these. Like, this isn't something that you can or can't do. But one interesting thing is that you're out there in the dirt, in the sun, and if you're going to wear a mask every day, are you going to start to get a rash on your face? Right? Like it's going to have other effects that you weren't necessarily anticipating. And it's going to cause other stressors. So, can we change the way we work? What gear can we use? Those trade-offs are really something for us to be considering. And within wildland fire, we don't know. There isn't necessarily a lot of research in this area in wildland fire. There's not a huge body of research. And there's even things in terms of, smoke exposure, particularly with wildland fire with wood. Is there a difference between attending a fire that is burning intensely or attending a fire that is smoldering? And what's the difference in terms of the chemicals and particulates and stuff that you're being exposed to in that smoke? And then, is there ways that we can alter what we're doing and what fires we're attending and what fires we're not? Because ultimately within wildland fire, we don't have to, nor would we want to actually put out every single fire in the environment, because it's a little bit different where, there is an ecological benefit to fire. So we need to really, there's trade-offs to all of this, and including the public. We felt, okay, well, if wildland firefighting isn't engaging in these fires, then the smoke is going across the country. Right. So in a way, wildland firefighters are taking that smoke and being exposed to that more but it's stopping smoke exposure at city levels, at like whole landscape levels. So there's trade-offs for sure in just what we think about of exposure, how we can mitigate it. Can we do differences in shifts and duration? You know, there's a lot for us to think about, and there's not necessarily a lot of like a full body of research to help us with those decisions.
All right, thank you very much for that, Heather. You know, you brought up a very valid point up as well, is the point of letting fires go, and the smoke continues to develop and move along as well, and right across our country, and that brings a point up sometimes we don't really think of the perspective of it, but it's also the value of the equipment that we need, boots on the ground when they're doing the work. So thank you for that. Robert, I'll come to you with the same question, pose that to you.
I'm just going to add maybe one more point to that, and
Sure.
is kind of continues with what I was saying about the trade-off, and Richard was talking about that too. Something else that we're seeing, and I don't know what the implications of this are. And again, for us, it's anecdotal at this point in time, and Jeffrey may be able to add something, and I don't know. With respect to those durable water repellent finishes, the issue of you know, decreasing the life expectancy, but we're also getting complaints from people that they're seeing what would have been taken out in the past. We're seeing some, typically from hydrocarbons, some additional staining of the gear that was never there before. So there may or may not be an implication to that, that in other words, some of the particulates are not being pulled out of that gear as well as they were in the past because of that change to the durable water repellent finish. And again, that's anecdotal. We don't have anything to, you know, any studies to back that up. It's stuff that's coming in, rolling in over the last year or so. And, you know, our standard answer based upon what the mills are telling us is that the change in that durable water repellent finish is causing those stains to kind of remain on the gear, whereas in the past they might have come out. Is there an implication there? I don't know. I can't speak to that. So that was just one point that I wanted to add in there. So.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Robert. That's a good point to think of as well. Jeff, your opinion on this question?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I got involved with the fire service back in the 80s, we used thickness to measure thermal insulation, which sounds crazy. But then the TPP test came along. And then we said, okay, we'll build coats with bigger, you know, with more insulation. And now we had physiological stress and cardiac events and other issues. And so then we moved to make sure that clothing was breathable. And then we said, okay, now we can balance out that thermal insulation with breathability. But then we look at durability, and we look at liquid performance against, say, bloodborne pathogens or fire-ground liquid chemicals. And then we start to worry about contamination resistance of gear, or the ability to clean the gear, or even just cleaning in the first place. And this all builds on, you know, on Heather's and Robert's and Richard's points already. It's this trade-off, but it's about risk assessment. And risk is, or assessing hazards, deciding what are acceptable risks. Obviously, you have a job to do. Are there ways to limit things from getting out of control? I used to say we used to build clothing so that people could go into fires this far, but then they go in this far. And the consequence of, you know, overprotection can be as big as a problem as underprotection. So finding that balance is really, really hard, and departments really have to look at what they do. But what enters into this is it's not just PPE, it's tactics, it's how you take care of things. It's a whole culture of understanding, you know, avoiding risk. In hazmat, which I'm going to tell you, structural firefighting is more hazmat than hazmat, but you know, we teach people to walk around puddles, or you know, not step into stuff, right? And I think we need to start thinking along those lines, because the trade-offs now are tremendous, and it's very difficult for departments to focus. We hope that the standards cover all this, and yes, we're seeing that where we try to fix one problem, we now create new problems, or things that the fire service didn't have to consider, whether it's the finish changes or, you know, lessening durability. And by the way, yes, there are differences in cleaning that occur when finishes are changed. So this has become incredibly complex. So how do we make this simple for the fire service? Well, you got to step back and say, what is my mission? What hazards I am most likely to face? What are my expectations for performance? And what's the technology, what are the ways I measure that that's successful, and what technology gets me there? I mean, simple questions, hard to answer. And I think that's the problem that the fire service is facing now. And we're all trying to struggle with that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that answer. And excuse me. And also, you made a valid point, the point of understanding what our actual risk levels are and what it looks like and how it looks overall and how we can reduce some of our risk as well. So thank you for that. The next question, I'll start out with Robert. And sure, Robert, just before that, I will say, everybody, thank you very much for our participants who are sending questions in through Menti. We greatly appreciate that, and it's things that we'll be able to, as part of our report, come out after this meeting as well that we'll put together. Next question for you, Robert. When we're talking lately, we hear a lot in the news, and we hear a lot of through literature that we have in the fire service right now, and we talk about PFAS. What are some implications that we're seeing around the use of gear that's related to the use of the fire service?
Very good question and very relevant to the time. So PFAS is a family of fluorine-based products. Depending upon who you talk to, there's 3,000 to 5,000, there's 3,000 to 7,000. That includes a lot of common chemicals. So it's a very touchy subject, so to speak. So at this stage in the game, what people really have to understand as it relates to the gear they're wearing now, any new gear that was built from, I believe it's the fall of 2021 going forward, the outer shell materials and the thermal liner materials have been manufactured fluorine or PFAS free. Hence, we were talking a little bit before about the composition of the new durable water repellent finishes. That's kind of what I was touching on there. Durable water repellent finish is kind of like a generic term that applies to whatever is being applied to the outer shell, or in some cases, some thermal liners. In the past, they were typically fluorine-based, either Teflon or another similar type chemical product, but that's changed. Those are out now. So the last stage that is being addressed right now is the moisture barriers, which are made of something called EPTFE, expanded polytetrafluoroethylene, as Teflon. So there are two manufacturers of those products. One is Steadfast. They have a product out now called Steadfast Clear, which is fluorine free. There are a couple of manufacturers that are certified. The rest of us are getting certified literally as we speak. There's been some hiccups in getting that product put out into the marketplace. And then we're going to be conducting some tests ourselves and two other manufacturers with 3 large metropolitan departments across North America to see how that new product behaves, so to speak. It's a different technology. It may be polyethylene. I'm not really sure at this stage in the game. There's going to be probably a trade-off with respect to that, as far as the current 1971 standard requires the performance of the gear and how it's going to act. Even the manufacturer itself is saying that there's probably going to be a trade-off. There's probably going to be less breathability with this product. It remains to be seen, because we're literally going through the testing right now. There's going to be a limited number of layups that are certified to it. So again, back to some earlier conversations about trade-offs. The other manufacturer, W.L. Gore, who produces moisture barriers, is in the process of doing something similar. They're not quite ready. They've taken different approaches. I think Steadfast wanted to come to market first, which is fine. Gore is taking a step back, saying, no, we want to research it so that when we release this product in the marketplace, their hope is that it will perform on the breathability test as good as their current product line. So, the 3 levels, or the three different fabrics will eventually be all fluorine or PFAS free. So I hope that answers that question.
No, thank you for Robert. I appreciate that. Appreciate your answer on that question. It's hard to believe, folks, we're 55 minutes into this. We could talk for hours, as Richard stated earlier, and others on this subject, and we could spend a whole day on it. But in the last final minutes, I would like to get everybody else's input on this question as well. And we'll turn now to Heather, your input on PFAS in firefighting equipment.
Well, I will have to say, I'd have to go to Jeffrey and Robert and go, you know, I have to show my ignorance here, and I don't know if it's in NOMEX. So I don't know if it's in, yeah, it's not. So, you know, for the most part, it's not necessarily in what we use, and even in the foam that we had been using, the type A foam, I don't think that it was in type A foam that we were using as well. So we've kind of been able to skirt that for the most part, because the default, if you don't have NOMEX, is to use natural fibers when you're fighting fire, you know, so you're out in cotton or something like that. So largely not as much exposure for us in that chemical.
No, not a problem. Thank you very much for Heather. By all means, this is a subject that a fair amount of information is out on the market now, but it's always good to have a conversation about it as well and bring that point up. So thank you for that. Jeffrey, I'll come to you on that next.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, as Robert points out, it's a tough subject. There's, you know, there's litigation that's going on. People are trying to do the right thing. You know, we've benefited from a technology that had provided unique performance attributes that really, that's the reason they were used, the materials. Now, you know, replacing them is a huge challenge, and some of that's been able to occur quicker for some products than others. And what we have to face is, though, again, understand the kinds of exposures that we have and where our priorities are for defining necessary protection. So, for example, if there are concerns about legacy gear that have PFAS in them, then we should limit the use of that gear. We don't need to wear them on EMS calls. We don't need to wear them for things that aren't structural, where that performance is definitely needed. There's other ways that we're trying to manage the expectations for technologies. We're also even taking a step back and saying, do we need everything that we've got, right, in terms of performance? Do we set some of these metrics so high because they could achieve them, and now they're harder to achieve with using alternative technology? Do they need to be at those same levels? And I think there's just going to be a lot of sorting out over the next several years. This is probably going to be over a decade or more to get us to where I think everyone's comfortable with the kinds of solutions that we have. But a very tough subject. Again, Robert, and I'm sure Richard will come to the same conclusion as well. So,
no, thank you for that, Jeff. And Richard, please take a few moments to give your input.
Yeah, I honestly don't have a whole lot to add beyond what's been said. There's some certain properties that alternatives currently don't exist for, and you know, as new technologies are developed to either meet the existing, you know, properties or reduce the demand for those properties, you know. But if yeah, I guess my theme has been trade-offs, and so there's going to continue to be trade-offs, and we need to, you know, do that analysis of what are the needs of the turnout gear, and you know, how do we achieve those? If it's lowering the performance characteristics in certain areas, but reducing other risks, then you know that's a trade-off we have to make. So I guess I'll end with my theme for the whole meeting of trade-offs. We'll have to continue over the next, as Jeff mentioned, over the next decade as we work toward that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. You know what, folks, panelists, thank you very much. Tremendously enjoyed this opportunity to meet with each one of you today and get your input on this, a very important subject. Please continue to do the important work you're doing on this subject, and please continue to educate us in the fire service, and also educate each other and others out there as well. And we do truly appreciate that. And also truly appreciate their participants today for joining us. And thank you for being here. The next session will be at 12:30 Eastern today, just another short half an hour away. And in the next session, they're going to be talking about provinces, preparedness, provinces, prevention, pairs, and presumption. It's a really important conversation around cancer as we continue. Thank you, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll look forward to seeing you in a half an hour at the next session, and take care.